What is a downside to living in Japan no one talks about? Story 1. I work with Japanese businesses, and the thing that infuriates me the most. Nobody will disagree with you in a meeting, even if you're wildly wrong and about to make a huge mistake. Even if it'll wreck their business, even if it's an objectively terrible idea. If you have a meeting coming up with 30 people in it, you need to have at least 30 one-on-ones ahead of time in order to get everyone's true thoughts. And you cannot mention any other one-on-ones. If you say, "Oh, I met with Bob and he said XYZ, then you've missed out on getting any kind of real opinion out of the person you're meeting with. They will shut down. Terrified of disagreement. Reply 1. Someone told me Japanese companies have a role called the loud American, whose specific task is to disagree with people publicly. I've always wondered if it's true because if it is, I find it very funny. Reply 2. It's true. I studied law in Japan, and one of my professor's jobs before working at my school was to be the American during negotiations. Apparently, many American-bought Japanese companies that were meeting with regular Japanese companies started to realize that people kept doing roundabouts during negotiations, which made meetings that should have been 1 hour take 3+ hours. Thus, Americans were being hired to be obnoxious and cut through the niceties. The Americans were told not to be rude, but to stop all the talk and the consideration. Reply 3. I've been on meetings in America where someone comments to the group, mid-meeting, something along the lines of, "This could have been solved with a simple email. Why are we having this meeting?" Sometimes direct feedback, even when it's negative, is very helpful, haha. We never had that meeting again. Reply 4. I come from an Italian-American family. Our levels of disagreements are only second to Jews. They rank 1 on the leaderboard. Reply 5. One thing I learned early on working with Japanese is that sucking in through the teeth before saying yes actually means no. Story 2. Japan doesn't protect a lot of basic civil rights very well. You can be discriminated against for disabilities in employment and even in healthcare choices. If you end up in a lawsuit, the court is extremely reluctant to make a judgment and will try to force an agreement even when the case should be clearly in favor of one side. If you're charged with a crime, you will be convicted. But not all crimes are charged, so if you're the victim of a crime and the police and prosecutor don't want to take the case to court, for fear of being in the tiny percentage that aren't convicted, the perpetrator will go free. Reply 1. An American friend of mine worked as an attorney in Japan. It drove him nuts that their first responsibility was to society/appearances, above the interests of their client. Reply 2. Similar thing here in Thailand. Social harmony and saving face overrides everything, especially for the rich. Reply 3. It's insane to me that Japan is like this. I watch a Japanese fisherman on YouTube. He was beaten up by a gang member in Tokyo, and apparently his only recourse would put his life in danger, and best case scenario, he could get money or some bullcrap like that. This gang member needs to be in prison. It makes Japan seem extremely weak, unable and unwilling to protect its citizens from common criminals. I've heard at least 100 cases like this online over the last 6 years. Reply 4. Wouldn't recommend reading about it if you've managed to avoid it, but the murder of Junko Furuta has always stuck in my mind when I think about how effed up the Japanese criminal justice system is. Reply 5. All I remember is that I told myself I didn't want to know anything about Junko or Nutty Putty, and to never re-find out. And I'm going to keep it that way. Story 3. I've lived in Japan for 12 years, and counting. Deep relationships are hard to come by. People don't often ask inquisitive questions for the sake of protecting someone's privacy. A big negative of that is most relationships are very surface level. In addition to this, people usually don't hang out at each other's houses. All gatherings and meetings must be planned well in advance, and things feel more like events rather than casual get-togethers. Ultimately, the lack of deep connections where you really get to know people is hard. People are so good at putting on an outward face and covering up their true selves. Reply 1. This was my experience of living in Tokyo, but not unexpected, due to the nature of big city living. I believe there are specific Japanese words and an associated pyramid of hierarchy for different levels of friendship and acquaintance group. The words summarize, and the underlying meaning probably prescribes, the extent of individual personality and openness it's socially acceptable to display in any social group. If I remember correctly, a word for friends from elementary school who you know deeply and may open up to almost fully, the daytime office acquaintance level of personality, the somewhat more open drinking with fellow office workers personality, and so on. I found that Japanese people from lower social classes, for want of a better term, are much less concerned with standing on social cultural pretense, or have been less socially conditioned from childhood to interact in such a Confucian way. Reply 2. This is one way I think my foreignness worked to my advantage with several of my Japanese friends. They are all already pretty unique in that they studied English and travel abroad, like non-Japanese things. And being with me, they got to let more of that personality show in a way I think they hid from other relationships. Kind of the reverse of what you're describing. I did experience that too, though. They'd share things with me or talk in a way I don't think they did normally with their peers. It probably helped that I wasn't in a position to go telling anybody else, since my communication skills were mediocre at best. Haha. Reply 3. I'm very much an introvert, so the lack of connection didn't get to me for the most part. But man, this comment does hit the nail on the head. Everyone wears a mask over their personality in Tokyo, like giving someone too much information about them is giving state secrets to the enemy. Reply 4. Once I started dating there, I felt I was more engaged and invited so small gatherings and hangouts that weren't events. But it did take finding and meeting a partner and then helping being that medium for daily hangouts with other people beyond scheduled events. Story 4. The salary. Even adjusted for cost of living, it's low. Best year of my life, and I learned a lot. But man, was it a pain to budget at times. Reply 1. That's why Nintendo made a JP-only Switch 2. That is $345 compared to everywhere else with $449 in Asakinai USD and current exchange rates, obviously. They thought their JP consumers wouldn't be able to justify $500 on a Switch 2 because of how much lower salaries are. Reply 2. Makes perfect sense after seeing the crap show Sony created with the PS5 and Pro. Japan was roasting the hell out of Sony, along with anybody outside of the USA, for having the galls proceed to charge almost $1,000 for a PS5 Pro with a disk drive. Reply 3. Yeah, but they had their own personal 2008 financial crisis. But it was the early 90s and they never recovered. Wage growth absolutely cratered for the young, and the only lucky part is that rents are still affordable. Though I did hear from a friend that their banking industry is taking off right now, and they're hiring traders and analysts for top dollar from abroad. Story 5. My buddy is Vietnamese and grew up in Southern California, then moved to Japan for work. He always felt SoCal was a little racist, but it was nothing like Japan. In Japan, Vietnamese are often uneducated immigrant workers and are seen as the lowest class. My buddy's Japanese wasn't amazing, it was his third language. And he dressed like a California skater. He would be refused service at restaurants, not allowed into stores, and called boat trash. He eventually learned to dress in expensive suits and only speak English, playing up his Americanness. He still had an old woman ask, "Who taught a dummy like you English?" Reply 1. I lived in Japan for 2 years, and I remember a local telling me that fair-skinned Japanese people look down on dark-skinned Japanese people. Not all Japanese people are like that, I'm sure, but he said it's pretty common. Reply 2. I remember fishing with an Asian friend of mine one time, and he was applying sunscreen literally every 15 minutes. I asked him why, and he was explaining how having darker skin in his culture was associated with lower-class field workers, and this would affect his chances with women from his culture. Reply 3. Half Japanese person who lived in Japan here. Most ethnically, Japanese people are generally and broadly speaking fair-skinned. Okinawans particularly are quite tanned because their island is much closer to the equator. Okinawans are considered a distinct ethnicity with their own language and culture. They were conquered and subjugated by the Japanese in the past. The famous Japanese racism applies here because even though outsiders would consider Okinawans to be Japanese, they are discriminated against, and their darker skin tones are considered to be unattractive and stereotyped as an indication of poor genes and education. We tend to think of the Japanese as ethnically homogeneous, but they still segregate and discriminate against themselves internally. Reply 4. Side note, that's a little happier. There was an anime last season specifically about Okinawa and its residents and uniqueness. It touched on the racism stuff a tad, but was mostly about showing off all the cool and unique parts of that island and Okinawan residents. It's super adorable. Reply 5. This reminds me of my first summer and how flabbergasted I was when my students referred to their classmate as Okinawan as an insult, since they actually went outside and were noticeably tanned versus the typical having stayed inside / covered and pale-skinned. Story 6. It is so futuristic in a way, but also so behind to anything bureaucratic or anything relating to paperwork. No online system, no chance to go in person, just mail. And God forbid you mail to the wrong person or even the department, they will mail back to do it again with the right addresses. It can be maddening. Reply 1. I work for a Japanese engineering company, and the bureaucracy is definitely something else. Also, it's considered rude to change someone else's design, so if something is wrong, you don't fix it. You basically put a new design on top of it that compensates for the error. Imagine the engineering design equivalent of painting over mold. Reply 2. How does that jive with Japan's reputation for excellent design and build quality? It seems inconsistent with the perceived reliability of something like Toyota. Reply 3. I've worked with Honda and had friends work with Toyota. Those paint over mold designs do get built, but they get filtered out in the prototype / testing phase. For major parts, they tend to be good at getting in the ballpark of the design requirements on the first try. However, if a large change is needed after that, it can get tricky. Changing an entry-level engineer's work is not super hard. A revision will come pretty quickly. If you need to revise an idea that came down from a high-level manager, you'll need to move heaven and earth to make it happen. Reply 4. The continuous improvement, 6 Sigma, and organization, 5S, that all major Japanese companies live by is what makes their processes reliable. Change comes very hard as it can disrupt both 6 Sigma and 5S plans that are in place, and bringing new things up to existing standards takes tons of time. That's why innovation moves at a glacial pace. Reply 5. Japan is a weird mix of being in 2050 while also being in 1950. So much stuff still requires physical paperwork. But most vending machines let you pay by NFC or debit card, and trains are so damn efficient. Story 7. There's this lady on TikTok that does a video series about what it's like being a foreigner in Japan. She's a teacher, and she had gotten a summer job at one point. Apparently they made her apologize for leaving and tried to force her to stay, and apparently some companies will try to sabotage your next job. Also, there's an issue with women living on the first floor of apartment buildings. I don't know if it's regional or not, but dryers are not something that she had access to, so they hang dry their laundry, and the landlord warned her about young men stealing panties from her little patio if she was living on the first floor. Reply 1. This is all accurate. Funny anecdote. I taught at a cram school a long time ago before getting a gig at a university. When I told the cram school owner I was leaving, several months in advance by the way, she interrogated me over where I was going. I reluctantly told her about the uni gig, and she scoffed at me and made some very rude, passive-aggressive comments about how people who work at universities have to be smart, but I guess they'll let any foreigner in, etc. By the way, she was incredibly nice and friendly before this. The last 2 months I worked at that place were hell, to be honest, and I actually ended up leaving early. Edit. I want to clarify, I'm a woman and chose to move here long-term and overall enjoy living here. I feel very safe and have much better healthcare and quality of life in Japan than in the US, where I'm from. I'm able to live comfortably in a major city. But I believe in order to enjoy your time here, you need to make cultural sacrifices. My personality in Japanese is totally different than in English. I put up with things that would send American women into a coma. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Reply 2. Is there a rule about when you have to give notice? Or is it best practice just to turn in your registration and leave? Oh, maybe give notice and lie and be like, I'm marrying Rich, so I'm no longer working. Then just skip happily over to your next job. Reply 3. Hitobito mentioned. I follow her content on Instagram and she's awesome. Whenever I start thinking the grass may be greener in Japan, her videos always bring me back down to earth. Story 8. Most of the stuff is talked about a lot, so I don't know. Ridiculous work culture that emphasizes appearance of effort over results. Normalized cheating. I remember someone at work whose wife would only give him enough cash to buy lunch so he wouldn't spend money in strip clubs. He ate cheap instant ramen to create his own secret fund and go see prostitutes. Being on the receiving end of xenophobia and racism is a new experience for Caucasian. Byzantine trash collection rules. Reply 1. I remember someone on here saying underperforming executives for a Japanese company were sent to work for the US branch as a punishment. They loved how much more laid back everything was once they got here. Reply 2. They also have this concept of back rooms or boredom rooms for when people F up or are no longer useful, but they don't want to fire them because the culture still heavily prioritizes job security and loyalty. So if you mess up or you're too old, they just move you to a different room and stop giving you real work to do. The idea is that you either get the hint and leave of your own accord, or you sit there until retirement. Reply 3. Leave of your own accord, or you sit there until retirement. I wish they'd try this in the Western world. Reply 4. I recall seeing a video where random ladies were being interviewed and asked what they think about their husbands cheating. And the general consensus seemed to be that it was expected and not a big deal. I was quite surprised, laugh out loud. Reply 5. A while back I saw the sort of opposite of the second one. Guy was antisocial and wanted to get out of a lot after work. Crap with his coworkers, so he just lied and said his wife was stingy and wouldn't give him any money to go drinking. He acted very gracious about not wanting to take their money and got out of it almost every time. So then he got to home and spent time with his wife. He also said he thought he was the only one in the office who seemed to even like his wife. Story 9. 1. I'm 2'3". I smack my head on doorways in those train bars at least once a day. Always check entryways got clearance. 2. Taking off your shoes to enter office buildings and schools and having to carry around an extra pair of footwear because your feet are too big to fit the provided slippers. 3. Going to the dentist. They often will take multiple sessions to fix one tooth, and sometimes the work is less than quality. 4. Deer in the headlights. Look Japanese get when interacting with you because you might be the only foreigner they've ever seen. It honestly must be what being a celebrity is like without the being rich part. I had a bunch of high school girls pretend to take an English class so they could sneak my picture and run out of the school giggling. 5. Japanese are hard to read by body language. I prided myself on being able to read people. That went out the window in Japan. They could literally be burning with the fires of hell with a hatred of you and you'd never know. Similarly, they might like you and ignore you until the day you leave they got you a present. 6. Upsetting Dubai Ibibwe. As a big, loud American, I thoroughly rupture the WA of my environment. 7. Gaslighting on the internet. See a video of Japanese going up the stairs in an orderly fashion on Reddit, and every comment is, Japanese are so orderly and polite. When in reality, if you are going up the stairs during rush hour, you better keep your head on a swivel, as you will be body checked into Bolivia. 8. Polite doesn't mean nice. Once again, polite doesn't mean nice. Reply 1. When in reality, if you are going up the stairs during rush hour, you better keep your head on a swivel, as you will be body checked into Bolivia. I do appreciate how the crowds flow in Japan. People get where they're going in a hurry. It's not like in the US where people randomly stop walking in the middle of a walkway or at the top of an escalator. Laugh out loud. It moves. However, this means if you slip up even a little, you're getting pushed and causing a whole thing laugh out loud. Reply 2. Think that's more of a city versus country thing. That's been my experience in Chicago and New York. The crowd just goes and you need to step to the side if you need to stop. The weird small cities that have high rural transplants are where I experience the random walking and stopping. Reply 3. Polite doesn't mean nice. As a Canadian, I thoroughly agree. I often see threads where the kindness and politeness of Canadians is praised, which, okay, fine. But that just means that bigotry, cruelty, and racism are tucked away under a thin, passive-aggressive veneer. Story 10. You need to use transparent trash bags and you need to take them out at 6 a.m. You're not allowed to take them out the evening before. You're not allowed to use trash can, but disgusting transparent bags. And if you mess that up, you'll need to have the trash bag inside your house waiting for you to get up early. And the schedule is all over the place. Disclaimer. Not all Japan is the same, but it is a known issue. Reply 1. In my town, we had to write our names on our transparent trash bags. One fateful garbage day, I forgot to write my name on my garbage bag. That evening, the garbage man knocked on my door to return my garbage to me. He explained I hadn't written my name on it. Feeling clever, I replied, "How do you know it's mine then?" "It has English things in it," he replied. Reply 2. When I lived in Japan, my house was in a small rural town. The immediate area I lived in hadn't been cleaned in years. I spent a weekend picking up trash in the area. I found all sorts of junk and had at least 10 bags of trash when I finished. I brought it all to the trash collection area and left it there. I got yelled at for an hour for doing that. Never mind that the neighborhood was clean and looked way better. I was banned from using the trash drop-off and had to use the one at my school. They'd complain every week that I had too much glass. I just couldn't figure out what they wanted. Reply 3. It's very possible that cleaning the area was part of their regular duties, and they just hadn't been doing it. So some foreigner doing it likely made them feel a mix of shame and anger that they decided to take out on you. Reply 4. This is it. If anyone, especially a foreigner, takes it on themselves to do the work locals have been neglecting, and this goes for anything, not just common area maintenance, they'll come down hard on that person until they run them off or they get over their feelings, whichever comes first. Reply 5. This sounds right. Doing the job of someone else is seen as purposefully making them lose face. Instead of it being politely ignored, now people have to acknowledge it was done, which shines a light on whoever was supposed to be doing it. People in Japan often prefer to not have to face uncomfortable situations like incompetence, so you instantly make yourself a target when you disrupt the system by doing something clearly meant for another person to do. If you get tasked somewhere and don't let the driver handle your luggage because you don't want to inconvenience them, for example, you are effectively insulting them, and they can take issue with your criticism of them doing their job. Story 11. Japan is a duality in so many ways, and if you live there for a while, the more superficial layer starts to chip away and you start to see some interesting things. I really try to look at it as not better or worse, just different. But that can be really hard at times. Japanese people are generally very respectful, kind, welcoming, polite, and interested in other cultures. Traveling there is safe and it's refreshing to be treated so well by default. But under the surface, there's deeply ingrained misogyny, racism, and ageism. It doesn't necessarily manifest in day-to-day interactions, but stay there long enough and you'll see its impact. For example, it's important in Japan for tea to be served to guests, but it doesn't matter how much authority a woman has. If she's the only woman around, she prepares the tea. I visited a company for work where the department head was a woman, and her employees were all men. She prepared the tea. The only time a man served me tea was when there were literally no women around. Then it was the youngest man's job. Racism usually manifests as genuine curiosity, and if you look different, you can feel like a movie star. You'll hear constant surprise that you can use chopsticks or speak a word of Japanese, but that's pretty innocuous, if tiresome. But try to get a driver's license, open a bank account, get a job, or buy a car, and you'll see the rampant systemic racism in action. Westerners also love the extremely punctual and efficient public transportation, perfect queuing, polite customer service, and general quietness in public spaces. But all of that comes from extremely rigid social standards. You will do a perfect job at work to make sure the trains are always on time. You will queue respectfully. You will be quiet. They have a saying that the nail that sticks up will be hammered down. Conformity to the group is mandatory, and if you wish to deviate, you have to do it in the accepted spaces. It results in bonkers artwork, wild after-work parties, crazy sex culture, etc. Because when they're allowed to let loose, they absolutely do. But it's very different from Western culture, and can be a difficult trade-off. There's a lot more stuff like that. A kind of utopian surface that visitors tend to appreciate, built on top of difficult or even dark concessions of freedom for the individual. The importance of personal freedom and liberty in all areas of life is what I grew to appreciate about America after living there for a long time. I still struggle with those trade-offs. For example, the US is so focused on individual liberty that we're basically fine with frequent massacres of our children, and the grocery store is an absolute main character syndrome nightmare. I wish we could find a middle ground of mutual respect, but also a fundamental importance of individual freedom. Reply 1. This last paragraph is so fascinating and a great observation. I often wonder why people seem to be getting more selfish, and that aspect of culture would likely be a driving force. Story 12. Not my story, but a school friend of mine who was obsessed with Japan. All his life basically achieved his dream and moved over there, married a Japanese woman and got a job with Bandai Namco. After 10 years, he practically fled the country with his wife, and had almost nothing but bad things to say. He says it's basically impossible to be truly accepted as a foreigner. The work culture is beyond insane, and the police and government have a frightening level of power. He highly recommends it as a holiday destination, but not to live. Reply 1. Bandai Namco, like many game companies, are notoriously horrible to work for, which is why they're always hiring for nearly every conceivable position and are constantly pumping money into recruitment agencies. Bandai Namco appears in nearly every single advertisement for multiple agencies. Sorry it sucked for your friend, but they worked for a notoriously bad example. Story 13. The constant subtle exclusion gets to you after a while. Been here 6 years and still get the wow, your chopstick skills are amazing. Comments like, yeah, Karen, I've been eating 3 meals a day here. I think I've figured out how to hold 2 sticks together by now. Story 14. I lived in rural Japan for a year as an assistant language teacher. A downside nobody talks about. How about not treating roads to sidewalks in winter? I didn't have a car and relied on getting around by bike and on foot. The first time it started melting and refreezing, it was a total crap show. Everything was covered in a half-inch of ice. I fell a lot despite being Minnesotan. When I was in Sapporo one time, I took a taxi and was making small talk with the driver about how the roads were so icy. He assured me it was totally safe, and immediately after that, as he tried to stop at a red light, he wildly fishtailed back and forth due to the ice. We both laughed about it. Seriously though, for a country with so many elderly folks who could easily break a bone in a fall, I don't understand the logic behind this. Bonus fun facts. In small towns, folks are much more likely to smile, wave, and say hi. Nearly everyone, including at work, was also very accepting of my forearm tattoo. Reply 1. In my area, they put out salt bags everywhere but seem to leave it up to motorists to decide when to open them. Of course, my area is eastern Kyushu and we hardly need to salt the roads most years. Most residents would only be confused if you tried to explain the concept of snow tires to them. I have never seen a road crew doing the salting, but I have driven on the roads when they were unnecessarily salted. It might be one of those jobs a brigade of senior gentlemen do at the crack of dawn. Reply 2. How about not treating roads, sidewalks in winter? Went to Sapporo during the winter. I was so shocked at the ice buildup on the sidewalks that I just straight up laughed. It was like this would be one huge lawsuit in a place like Chicago. It was both horrific and hilarious. Story 15. That in many aspects where the Japanese seem way ahead of other countries, it's because they are comically behind everyone else in some aspect. Japan did not have the credit card culture North America and Europe have. So, that's the reason Japanese cell phones got tap to pay in the late 90s. Those phones were linked to something like a PayPal account that had to be manually topped up in cash at a convenience store. So, not as easy as it looked. The lack of credit cards also often meant paying in cash. Japanese people wanting first-class airline tickets thought nothing of going to a bank, withdrawing $15,000 in cash, and taking it to the nearest JAL office to buy tickets in person, rather than online. Faxing may still live on in Japan, and if it's dead, it's somewhat recent. It was also common for Japanese bosses to look at every fax that came in, so no making fun of your boss via fax. I know their IT is generally way behind the US. A few years ago, it wasn't uncommon to see Windows 98 in offices still. Reply 1. Faxing lives on in a lot of places. I work for USA state government, and one of our agencies receives 12,000 faxes a week. Reply 2. Japan being comically behind on tech and banking systems baffles me so much as they got so many quality of life tech. But for actual important stuff like banking or buying train tickets, it's like pulling teeth with how convoluted or outdated it is. Anytime I see those, oh my god, Japan is truly living in 2050 vids on Instagram about quirky stationary gadgets or a public machine that cleans water bottles, I roll my eyes. I remember people complaining about trying to get a Suica card as soon as they land, as finding a kiosk that makes the cards was sparse, and they recommended to you instead to use their app to load tickets, which really only works on Apple phones/iOS devices, so if you used Android, you were SOL. Story 16. My wife is Japanese. We don't live there, but we go often and stay with her family in Fukui for a month or so a year. Here are my picks. Wayne. The really effing bizarre tradition about not complimenting other people's children for being cute. It's not a politeness or protection thing, but one of vanity. Everyone thinks everyone else's kids are ugly. I get made fun of for calling a kid cute. Even old women don't share pictures of their grandchildren with each other. 2. These zero physical affection towards your own children. No hugs, nothing. I have to refrain from hugging my own kid when there. 3. The cheating like 2 of my wives. 30 close friends are loyal to their husbands. Lawsuits for cheating spouses are a thing in Japan, which has a good number of my wife's friends either paying or receiving claims for adultery. 4. Everything being covered in plastic despite draconian trash rules. 5. Women who have been raped or abused by their spouses still live with the in-laws despite their husband being prosecuted for it. 6. Ineffective waxy or plastic napkins. Reply 1. I've heard about the cheating. Watched interviews with Japanese women, and almost all of them seemed fine if their partners were getting sex elsewhere. Because it's just sex and not love/relationship. And you just sort of slipped number 6 in there, didn't you? Waxed napkins, TF? Reply 2. Not sure what they mean by waxed napkins, but McDonald's there uses those stupid, almost plastic napkins which can barely clean anything. Maybe it's the same thing. Dunno. Story 17. Something that does come up, but I feel like most people don't internalize, is just how xenophobic Japanese natives are. As a culture, they never really left behind the "we are beacons of civilization and everyone else are barbarians" mindset. Story 18. The underlying racism. If you speak Japanese as a foreign, that's great. If you're mixed race, part of which is Japanese, and speak Japanese, that is not cool for some. The Japanese word for someone of mixed Japanese heritage is half. Also, the underlying misogyny is pretty outrageous. Reply 1. If you speak Japanese as a foreign, that's great. It does, however, mean you have to accept that every Japanese person you ever meet will hit you with Nihongo Juzu. You speak Japanese well. Story 19. I like Japan, but there's some drawbacks. Japanese people are insanely racist. Way too many rules. These people love rules. Way too many rules. These people love rules. The Japanese justice and civil tort system is insanely draconian and dysfunctional. Their houses are very small. Their salaries are very low compared to a high cost of living. The yen is weak. The fertility crisis continues to degrade their economy. It's the oldest country in the world, so the dating scene wouldn't be great. Story 20. The dating scene here is rough if you're a foreign woman. Lots of guys either fetishize you or are intimidated by you. After 3 years, I've pretty much given up and focused on my career instead.
Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.